For the owner of LVMH, Bernard Arnault, I'm pretty sure I screwed up his name, he's worth $116 billion. He's the third richest man in the world. $400 million to him is like me finding 20 bucks in my back pocket. Welcome to No Bull with Zaid, a new unfiltered business show airing on Bullish. If you want to see more, subscribe, like, and comment below. Welcome back to No Bull with Zaid. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Apple creating their own search engine and Google might be freaking out. And then we're going to talk about LVMH, the famous French company that owns famous brands like Louis Vuitton, Christian Dior, among other things. They're having a bit of buyer's remorse regarding their acquisition of Tiffany's, the famous jewelry company based out of New York. I feel like everybody has buyer's remorse every time they walk into Tiffany's. Anyways, we're gonna break it all down. All right, let's go. Let's start with Apple creating their own search engine because this might be humongous news in the world of tech. A report recently came out that Apple might make their own search engine, which is crazy to think about because you wouldn't think anybody would want to compete with Google. I mean, Google has the best search product by far. So why would Apple want to make their own search engine? It doesn't really make any sense. It all has to do with this latest case that the US Justice Department is suing Google for being a monopoly. It's all connected. And the biggest problem that the US Justice Department has with Google is these deals that Google makes with phone manufacturers like Apple. So for example, Google pays Apple $12 billion a year to make Google the default search engine on all iPhones. So there's a very real chance if the US Justice Department is successful in their lawsuit against Google that this deal might have to be canceled. The government might force this deal to be canceled. So what Apple is doing is taking this opportunity to make their own search engine. So the thing is, search engine is a very lucrative business, or at least it can be. Google made almost $100 billion in 2019 from their search business. That's a lot of freaking money. And Apple realizes that if the government does force this deal between Google and Apple to be canceled, Apple's gonna lose out on $12 billion that they were getting from Google. So by creating a search engine now, they have the potential of starting to make up for that lost revenue. The big advantage that Apple has that no other search engine like Bing or DuckDuckGo has is they have hardware. They have the iPhone. See, overnight, Apple can issue an update and make this new Apple search product the default search engine on all iPhones in the world. Apple could literally gain hundreds of millions of users overnight. I know some of you guys might be thinking like, what if Apple search just sucks? People are just gonna switch their default from Apple search to Google search. See, the thing is 90% of people are lazy or not tech savvy enough to change the default search engine on their phones. They're gonna leave it whatever it is. Apple knows that overnight they can gain hundreds of millions of users and start earning money from their search engine. Even though whatever search engine they create is not gonna be nearly as good as Google, because it doesn't have to be. It's all about users. And this news is freaking out Google. Because see, Google doesn't really have a real competitor. The biggest competitor might be Bing, Yahoo, or DuckDuckGo. But none of those guys are really a major threat to Google. Now remember, Google is paying Apple $12 billion a year to be the default search engine on the iPhone. So it's reasonable to expect that Google is probably making more than $12 billion a year for being the default search engine on all iPhones. Sure, they won't have to pay Apple $12 billion a year, but they're gonna lose out on so much revenue that they typically count on. And now I can't even imagine what's going on at Apple headquarters right now when this news broke. And it could be the first legitimate competition that Google has since like Ask Jeeves. You guys remember Ask Jeeves? Man, good times. So I'm gonna be watching this one real closely and seeing how this all plays out. Is Apple going to make their own search engine? Are they gonna invest all that money into making their search engine? And how fast are they gonna roll it out? Is it gonna be released with the new iPhone next year? Are we gonna see it roll out in the next 6 months? I'm so interested to see what the timeline is. And the other thing is, what if the US Justice Department loses their lawsuit against Google? If the deal between Apple and Google isn't in jeopardy from the government, is Apple still gonna try to create their own search engine, or are they gonna be cool with receiving $12 billion a year from Google? This is all a really interesting story. I personally think that Apple is gonna create their own search engine. I think they're gonna go through with it regardless of what happens with this lawsuit between the US government and Google, because I think that Apple can make more than $12 billion a year eventually long term having their own search product. Because again, they're gonna have the iPhone as their main driver of acquiring users. The iPhone is such a powerful thing for Apple, and they can continue to build and gain users by making Apple Search the default search engine on all iPhones moving forward. So this is really interesting. So follow it closely and see how Google reacts. Is Google gonna do something to maybe stop this from happening? Are they gonna just offer to pay Apple $20 billion a year? I have no idea. But this is also interesting. There's so many moving parts and pieces with the government being involved and Google still having Android as a backup. I mean, there's so many things there's so many moving parts here that I'll be watching it all real closely. Let's talk about buyer's remorse, because we all get it. Buying the unnecessary Instapot on Amazon for $70 because you saw 3 good YouTube videos about it being delivered to your house, and then you never using it. That's happened to all of us. But at least we're not LVMH. LVMH is one of the biggest companies in Europe. They own brands such as Louis Vuitton, Christian Dior, and other expensive companies whose names that I can't pronounce. And back in November of 2019, when the world was a different place, they agreed to acquire Tiffany's, the ridiculously famous, well-known diamond and jewelry company based out of New York. They got the fancy commercials and the blue fucking box. Like, you know, you've seen a Tiffany's box. You've seen a Tiffany's commercial. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, LVMH thought it would make a lot of sense. LVMH has a portfolio of all these expensive, luxurious companies, and they wanted to bring in Tiffany's. LVMH agreed to acquire Tiffany's for $16.2 billion back in November 2019. Now, the dates are pretty crucial in this story. Back in November 2019, things were looking good. The economy was doing good. Luxury spending was on the rise, especially in China. Everything was looking great for Tiffany's. Well, then 2020 happened and the world changed. COVID hit and spread across the entire world. People stopped caring about buying expensive jewelry and instead cared more about buying toilet paper. And that resulted in a huge drop in sales for Tiffany's and even LVMH. All their luxury brands took a dip in sales. Naturally, LVMH was like, you know what, Tiffany, we don't want to do this deal with you anymore. But they had already agreed to acquire them. So Tiffany's was like, screw that shit, we're filing a lawsuit. And a lawsuit was filed in Delaware where Tiffany was like, no, you need to buy us because you agreed to buy us. Now, this is where the story gets a little weird. There was back and forth, and eventually LVMH did agree to acquire Tiffany's, but at a slightly lower price. Now, before I tell you the price, you might be thinking, okay, well, they probably got, you know, at least 20% off, right? I mean, we're in a freaking pandemic. Tiffany's sales have dropped double digits. Of course, they probably got at least 15-20% off. No, they agreed to drop the price by $400 million. The acquisition price went from $16.2 billion to $15.8 billion. That's about like 3% of the total price. I mean, look, I love getting deals, but I can't really think 3% is a huge deal. Now, in real numbers, $400 million is a lot of money for people like you and me. For the owner of LVMH, Bernard Arnault, I'm pretty sure I screwed up his name, he's worth $116 billion. He's the 3rd richest man in the world. $400 million to him is like me finding 20 bucks in my back pocket. I don't really know what he was trying to go for here. I mean, I'm sure he spent half that money on legal fees fighting this case in Delaware. Anyways, it seems like the deal is going through. I'm sure they still have buyer's remorse. I'm sure if LVMH could get out of this deal, they would try to, or at least try to get more money out. But I think they probably realized that they can't get out of this deal because they already agreed to acquire Tiffany's back in November. So they're probably just happy they even were able to get a little bit of a discount. So yeah, like I said, I think everyone has buyer's remorse every time they walk out of Tiffany's, and LVMH is the latest victim. Thank you guys so much for joining me for another episode of No Bull with Zaid. If you like this content, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment on any topics you'd like for me to cover in any future videos. I'll see you guys in the next video.